Go. Hey, everybody in YouTube land. I wish I had some fancy theme music. Maybe I'll add that a little bit later. My name is Charlie. I call myself the Commie Preacher, and I am organizing the Church of the Revolution, which is going to be a hybrid, virtual and IRL, in real life, faith community based upon the belief that Jesus was a communist. You don't have to be a Christian. You can be an atheist and still believe Jesus was a communist. There are many of them. I'll actually point out a few of them as I go along. The atheists who believed Jesus was a communist. In fact, Karl Marx sort of believed it. Really, he sort of did. Definitely some of the people who brought communism to Karl Marx's attention before he was a communist were in fact Christians. So in this first video, I figured the best thing I should do is introduce myself. So again, my name is Charley Earp, and I live in Evanston, Illinois. I have a Red Star t-shirt. Can't get it in here because of aspect ratios and stuff. I can move back a little. I don't want this video to feel too freaking amateurish because I've had to work a bit to get to even this point. All right, but this is just the introduction. That can be a little informal. Like I said, have a beverage of your choice. Okay. No commercial, no product placement here. All right. So how did Jesus make me a communist? Who were you? Well, in 1963, I was born into a Pentecostal preacher's family. My father was a moderate to conservative Democrat. He was born and raised and lived most of his life in Texas. I was born in Texas, but he took my mother and me to Illinois, first to Peoria, Illinois, and I lived there for a few years. And then from Peoria, we went to Bushnell, Illinois, and then Chicago. Chicago was where my life kind of got transformed and upended in the beginning, I would say, of this journey to becoming a communist follower of Jesus. So in the Pentecostalism, just to talk about it, Pentecostalism is a very wild and emotional religion. And I don't say that to put it down. I mean, I'm still a rock and roll, headbanger myself, because Pentecostalism basically said, losing your stuff, losing your self-control and yielding up to the energy of the universe, also known as the Holy Spirit, was how you got in touch with the divine being. And I still kind of believe that. Is that it's about just sort of knowing that you are one with everything and that the power of the universe and the cosmos is pouring into your body. And that's what Pentecostalism aims to do. And they use, exciting music and praying in a really impassioned way to get it around, to get to that state of consciousness. It's an ecstatic religion. And I'm still an ecstatic, You should see me at a good rock and roll concert. I'm losing my stuff, I'm getting into it. All right. And even, let's not follow too many rabbit trails. So around 1977, I was living in Chicago, and I discovered a Christian rock band by the name of Resurrection Band. And actually, before I discovered them, I discovered that there was a commune that the Resurrection Band had actually emerged out of as one of their ministries. And I was handed at a revival meeting that my father was going to down in the Airy Crown Auditorium of McCormick Place. It's like one of the big, convention centers. And this preacher was preaching there. I didn't care what the preacher had to say. He wasn't my kind of preacher. He was, But this magazine that was handed me called Cornerstone, or a newspaper, I should say. It was a newspaper. It became a magazine later. The newspaper for the Cornerstone that I was handed was from the Jesus People USA commune in uptown Chicago. And they're still there to this day. This was 1976, 77-ish that I discovered the Jesus People and Resurrection Band. And I discovered that they were living communally. And I read one of their little tracts about communal living. And I said, that's it. That's what I want. I want to live in a commune. And I told my high school buddies. They thought it was crazy. I mean, they were all Christians, just as passionate, maybe, as I was. Maybe I was a little more passionate. I mean, I was a Pentecostal. And I also was a victim of child abuse by the very father who was, the preacher. And so I had a lot of emotional intensity. And so I said, I'm going to move to a commune. So jump ahead, this was around 1976, 77, jump ahead, 1986. After a long search, after getting married, after having a child with my wife, with whom I am still married since 1982, we moved to live in a commune in Evanston, Illinois. Now, between living in Chicago and eventually resettling in Evanston, I lived back in Texas for a while, I lived in California for a while, back to Texas, and then back to Evanston. So I've lived mainly in Illinois, Texas, and California. I've never lived anywhere else, which is a shame, but I'm kind of old to fix that. I'm around 58 years old. I will be turning 58 in the month of March 2021. So if you're seeing this video after that, I'm already 58. Okay, this is admittedly very casual, very informal, and some of you are going to like, what? Can you get to your effing point? How did Jesus make you a communist? Well, I already stated, I learned about communal living, which is described in the book of Acts, which is the 5th book of the Christian scriptures. And where after Jesus had been crucified by the Romans, and then his spiritual body appeared to them in visions, they were endued with the power of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost, so Pentecost, and they began to speak in tongues. And then the first thing they did is they gathered about 3,000 people, baptized them, and created a commune next to the temple in Jerusalem. Basically, it was Occupy, Temple Square, or whatever they call it, the temple. Occupy the Jerusalem temple. It was this group of thousands of Christians, thousands of followers of Jesus of Nazareth, who just a few months earlier had marched into Jerusalem riding on a donkey. And they said he is the, he is the king, he's the son of David, he is the son of God. He's going to liberate us from the Roman oppressors. And the Roman oppressors killed him. Get the picture? So in Jerusalem, they had this commune, and they shared everything that they owned with everyone. And they grew, by another 6,000 a few weeks later. And this is the story in the book of Acts. Now, we can argue about the historicity of all these details, and if you're into that, do it. But my point is, I'm not going to argue the historicity, because to me, it's a story. And a story can be absolutely true, even if it's not factually accurate. And you know what I'm talking about. You have read some powerful piece of fiction that changed your life. Every one of us has. You've seen a great movie. You've seen a great television show. Something that wasn't literally true that nevertheless changed your life. And that's what I say about this story. I believe there's some good deal of historicity to the story of Jesus and the early Jerusalem commune, but the details are not important. The factual historicity is really not that important. What is important is that it's a story that inspired and changes lives every time it's told. All right. 1986, after years of searching through various communes, I talked to Sojourners Commune in Washington, D.C. that are now the publishers of, or were then the publishers of Sojourners magazine. The commune no longer exists, but the magazine is still printed. It's a Christian periodical dedicated to anti-war, anti-racism, and anti-poverty. And so through their influence, I said, well, you can't take me to live in your commune, me and my wife and my baby daughter, but where would you recommend? And they said, why don't you contact Riva Place Fellowship in Evanston, Illinois? And I'm like, oh, well, that's really close to where I used to live. Evanston is right on the north border of Chicago, maybe a few miles from where I had lived and a few miles from where I'd gone to church all those years in Chicago for about 4 years. So I said, okay. I wrote the commune. The first letter I got back was a long, rambling letter from one of their members, and I said, okay, I'm going straight to the top. So I wrote a letter to the chief elder of the commune, a guy named Virgil Vogt, who is still with us. He's been a part of that commune since the late 60s, early 70s. And he's, for years, he was sort of the most visible public leader of the commune, which still exists. Riva Place Fellowship still exists. It's, less than 100 people. At one point it was thousands of people. Now it's a few hundred, or 100, less than 100. That's okay, because communes almost never live forever. Because why? Capitalism. Okay. That's why you got to get capitalism out of the way so that communes can flourish. True story. All right. So in 1986, my infant daughter, who was not even 12 months old, my wife and I moved from Dallas, Texas, where we were living then, as newlywed, new parents. We moved to Evanston, and we began living in communally owned property. We house sat for one member of the church, and with one family of the church, and we eventually moved into an apartment that was communally owned. We were not members of the commune. We were residents of the communal property, but we got to enjoy many of the benefits of communal living without throwing our paycheck into it. We had to pay rent. We had to pay bills, but everything else that the community offered, weekly dinners together where you got to know people, you got to know them really well and really intimately, weekly small group meetings. All of these things transformed my life that I could begin to understand why a commune is perhaps the most perfect form of human life. And I really believe that. And so when I talk about communism, I start there. Now, that doesn't mean I reject Karl Marx. Doesn't mean I reject the anarcho-communists. I think they have a lot to offer. I've learned a lot from reading both Marx and the anarcho-communists. And I would never reject them just because they weren't followers of Jesus. But I would argue that, in fact, if Karl Marx was a real follower of Hegel, who was the philosopher who had the most influence on Karl Marx, Hegel was a Christian. Hegel believed that Jesus and Christianity was the highest form of religion on earth. He said that. And if he's a philosopher trying to understand what the greatest religion on earth was, he had to say, I must be a Christian. Now, there's problems with that, because I don't know that I believe Christianity is the greatest religion on earth. I would say Islam is about to overtake Christianity. Christianity's not slowing down. It's continuing to circle the globe. I mean, it's on the decline in the United States, but around the world, Christianity is still growing as fast as it ever has in the 20th and 21st centuries. But Islam just happens to be growing a little faster. Okay, that's a point for another video. So 1986, I moved and lived with this commune. I lived with them for 5 years, which was 1995. But actually in 1994, I joined my first socialist organization, and I began to deconstruct my Pentecostal faith. Because even though I'd lived in a commune and I began to believe in all these wild and radical ideas, at my heart, I was still this Pentecostal who believed everything in the Bible pretty freaking literally. But I had a major transformative healing experience while living with the commune, and I began to say, I don't know if I want to be that kind of a Christian anymore, the kind of right-wing Christian who hates homosexuals, the kind of right-wing Christian who wants, or at least believes they're all going to hell, even if they don't hate them. They fear them. I would say they fear them. But that's a whole other debate that we'll talk about another time. My next video will get into that a little bit deeper. So again, in 1994, I joined my first socialist organization. It was called the Committees of Correspondence, and it was founded by the people who were connected to Angela Davis. You ever heard of her? Angela Davis is a fairly infamous communist African-American woman from the 1960s. She was thrown in jail for having possibly aided the Black Panther Party in giving them weapons or something. She was later acquitted of all those charges, but she was closely connected to the Black Panther Party. So Angela Davis was a part of this organization that became known as the Committees of Correspondence for Socialism and Democracy, which was a split from the Communist Party USA. Okay, you following me? All right. So what was going on in the early 90s was the collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, East Germany, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, all those communist governments just fell out of power and became, quote, liberal democracies or capitalist democracies, however you want to talk about it. And so that's when I began to realize that I'm a socialist, but all the previous experiments with socialism, all the attempts to bring socialism about in all these different countries were destroyed by capitalism. Now you can say, they were destroyed because they were internally, they had these internal problems, they were authoritarian, etc. That's not my particular belief. I think that the nations of the Soviet that were aligned to the Soviet Union fell apart because of capitalism. Capitalism destroyed them from within, because that's what capitalism does. Anything that doesn't play by the rules of the market, capitalism as a impersonal economic system will undermine that society. And that's another complicated argument for another time. But suffice it to say that since I was already a Christian communist, a Christian socialist, a socialist follower of Jesus, I began a search, or circa around 1994, 95, to understand, both to deconstruct my religious Pentecostal fundamentalism, which there's a lot of problems with being a fundamentalist. I think being a Pentecostal in some ways is really fun. It's exciting religion. It's energizing. It's an adventure. But there was some traumatic stuff going on. I'm trying to avoid the F-bombs and the S-bombs. Later, after you get to know me, you'll see that I sure do use those words, and I will be happy to use those words. But for this video, you're just getting to know me. All right. So we're up to 1995 when I began to deconstruct my Christianity really hard in 1997, became a socialist, left the commune. I did leave the commune in 1995. I was never a 100% investment. Like, I never signed up for my paycheck to the commune. I paid rent to the commune. The entire time I was there, I participated in many communal activities. And had the stars aligned a different way, I might have joined that commune. I was there 9 years. I gave it the college try. And I currently, just side note, I live in a communally owned apartment by that same commune now in 2021. We moved back here about 4 or 5 years ago to this part of Evanston, and we ended up renting from the commune again because I actually love the idea that it's a non-profit commune that is my landlord. It's hard to get much better than that when you live in a capitalist economy. Take a sip of your beverage. All right. So 1994 was a watershed year. 1995, 1997, I began to deconstruct. And I'm going to jump a long way. I'm going to jump to 2008. 2008 was a couple of things happened. One, Barack Obama won the election, which was a shock. A black man winning the presidency of the United States. Who would have thought? Now, I voted for a black candidate for president, but it wasn't Barack Obama. It was the Green Party's candidate. And unfortunately, I'm a little embarrassed about that because she later turned out to be a bit of an unstable person, the woman that I voted for. She's no longer in Congress. She was in Congress when she ran as a Green presidential candidate. But be that as it may, you can go look it up. Who ran for president of the Green Party in 2008? You'll find out who I'm talking about. Right now, the name isn't coming to me. I'm getting a little old, almost 58 years old, and sometimes names just don't pop into my head. I'll probably remember her later, but that's not a point. That's not an important point. I was voting third party starting in, I actually, in the 90s, I began boycotting the U.S. elections because I thought they were just a show. It was either this rich guy or that rich guy, a conservative rich guy or a somewhat liberal rich guy. Maybe it's better to have the liberal rich guy be your president, but it's still a rich guy. It's still a capitalist. And he still doesn't give a damn about poor people. All right. Except maybe to throw us, $1,600 one time. Okay, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 and 21. Throws us $1,400, Even Trump gave us, $1,200. Anyway, let's not keep on that track. The presidency, in my opinion, is a flawed and ultimately an institution that will destroy itself, just as the American capitalist economy and the global capitalist economy will destroy itself. And hopefully by the time the global capitalist economy begins to destroy itself, we will have organized a revolutionary communist movement that can transform the entire planet. That's what I live for. That is what the Church of the Revolution is all dedicated about. And we believe that Jesus has an important role to play in the creation of the new communism that I believe in. And I'm not the only one, as John Lennon sang in Imagine. I know many other communists. Some are Christian, followers of Jesus. Many of them are atheists, probably more. But I think that if we're going to have communism on a worldwide scale, we need Christians, we need Muslims, we need Jews, we need Buddhists, we need Hindus, we need atheists. We all need to learn to work together for this thing called communism, which Karl Marx says is a long, deeply held dream of humankind. And it is. And Jesus is just one example of that long, deeply held dream of humankind. So now, going to jump to 2010. I don't know why, just sort of random. 10 years ago now. 10 years ago, I was blogging my political philosophy, I was blogging my theology, I was blogging my religious thoughts, and I got involved with a cooperative blog that was run basically by Marxists. I was one of the few non-Marxists on that blog. And I was having a dialogue with the founder of this collaborative blog about Jesus, about Marxism and religion and Christianity and, all that stuff. And it was while that I was also taking a nonfiction writing course. The first essay I wrote was a somewhat memoirish essay about the time I lived with the Commune. The Commune is Riva Place Fellowship. You can look it up. It still exists. They also have Riva Place Church, which is the church founded by the Commune. Because not everybody who wants to join the church wants to join the Commune. I mean, it makes sense, right? Okay. So, in 2010, through these dialogues with these Marxists I was having on Facebook, Left Book, 2010 was probably the heyday of Left Book on Facebook. I became a communist. It was just a natural progression. I had been a communalist living in little communes like Riva Place Fellowship, and then I became an anarcho-communist, believing that every Christian church should start a commune along the lines of like the Catholic Worker and so on that served the poor people of that area. And so we should, if we could get a commune in every single church around the globe, we would have the bones for a true communist world order. Now that was my anarcho-communist phase. And I totally don't reject it. It's simply, I no longer think in anarchist terms about communism. I also don't think in Leninist terms or Marxist terms. The core is Jesus. The core is my moral commitment to the life that Jesus called me to those decades ago when I moved to live with a commune and basically gave up my job, gave up the possessions that I had except what I could stick in a small truck, and moved clear across the country from Texas to Evanston to live communally for Jesus. So 2010, back to 2010, I was writing a memoir about the years that I lived with the commune. And it was while writing that memoir that I heard Jesus speak and say, hey, we haven't talked for a while. And that's cool. I'm always with you. You don't have to seek me out. I'm here. I am a part of who you are. You were raised on my gospels. And you live by what's in your heart. You don't have to have religious commitments that everybody understands. Most people don't understand my religious commitments, and that's okay. So in 2010, I began to call myself a communist, and I started trying to figure out, how do I get this message out? It's like I've had a prophetic word. Jesus was a communist, and the world needs to try again to create a communism in the aftermath of the 20th century and the almost total failure of communism in the 20th century. We need a 21st century communism, and one aspect of it is Jesus of Nazareth, because if we can get Christians to understand that Jesus was a communist, we can create that new kind of communism. It will be a necessity. All right. So that was 2010. I began to say I wanted to be a prophetic communist preacher. And that means that in 2015, so we're jumping ahead 5 years, I ended up in seminary. Now, my whole life, I have studied the Bible. I have studied theology. I have studied philosophy. From the time I was 9 years old, I read my first, quote, theology book. It's a book you may know, The Late Great Planet Earth, which is a prophetic theology that is now I think is a little out there. I think it totally misunderstands the Bible, but at 9 years old, to read a complicated book about the end of the world, I think it's kind of a feat. And that shows what I was interested in, even back then, was religion. Religion was, in some ways, the most amazing thing I'd ever, in my life. Because religion healed me. Religion loved me even better than my own father, who I mentioned was a Pentecostal preacher and who was a bit abusive. Nevertheless, he introduced me to Jesus, and because I was able to distinguish my faith from what my father was teaching me, and I created my own relationship with Jesus, And then I moved into a commune and created a relationship with other people who saw Jesus much like I did. And in fact, they transformed even what I was understanding none of Jesus. All right, so the next piece of all this is that in 2015 I went to seminary, and I chose the most liberal seminary I could find, which was Meadville Lombard Theological School, right in the city of Chicago, which is a part of the Unitarian Universalist Association's seminaries. There's only really 2 official seminaries. And so I went to Meadville Lombard and began to work on getting an academic degree, a Master of Divinity, to become a professional minister. Now, I had joined a Unitarian Universalist church that was also a Christian church. There aren't a lot of these, but back in the day, all Unitarians and Universalists were Christians. You know, back in the 1800s, they were all Christians. It's only recently that Unitarian Universalism has a reputation for being really loosey-goosey and you can believe anything you want. We don't encourage people to say that you can believe anything you want, because really, if you're a Nazi, we'll probably run you out. Unitarian Universalism has limits to their inclusivity, and I think as they should. I mean, justice matters more than being nice and accepting. Okay. Like I said, this is just a casual conversation. Drink your favorite beverage. All right, so it's 2015. I go to seminary. I become a minister, an intern minister first in a church here in Chicago. Work with them for 2 years, half-time. Graduated in 2018. Passed my ministerial fellowship interview, which occurred in 2019. And so now it is 2021. And in the past 2 years, one of the many things I've been doing is developing the Church of the Revolution, or at least the bones of it, the things that led to it. There are a lot of things that led to creating Church of the Revolution. I did a podcast. I did Bible studies. I did lectures. I would go to a local forum and lecture on Jesus was a communist and Jesus made me a communist. So I was doing all kinds of work building up to becoming a professional minister. And I now am a professional minister. I work part-time for a church in Illinois. It's pandemic, and I've actually never seen the church in real life. I've only seen it on Zoom. All right. And hopefully that will change when the pandemic conditions shift a bit here. And I continue to work for them. I don't work for them full-time, and that's my choice. Because this Church of the Revolution, Jesus was a communist, this is my core calling, my prophetic ministry. So I hope that in this 30-minute video that we're coming up on right now, you found something you like. And I'm going to post this on YouTube. Actually, if you're watching it, you're only watching it on YouTube. It's not going to be anywhere else. I also have a TikTok channel. TikTok, as you know, it's 1-minute videos, and I am learning to speak in 1-minute sound bites. It's a little tough, given that I am a bit of a long-winded rabbit trail chasing speaker, even when I'm preaching for the Utah church that I work for. That said, I hope you like what you hear. And next video, my very next video, which I hope to actually get done tonight, is going to be on the communism of love versus the death systems. So we're going to talk about what are the elements of the communism of love that is inspired by Jesus, but not everything in the communism of love can be traced back to Jesus, because Jesus was a person of his time. In fact, most Christians don't even really worship the flesh and bones Jesus who walked around Palestine. They worship the resurrected Jesus. And if there really is a resurrected Jesus, and I think in a certain sense you can say there is, he knows all of history between the time he was executed and now, and in that history he has in fact guided humanity towards communism. He's been guiding them there all along. He didn't have the word communism because it ain't in Greek and it ain't in Hebrew and it ain't in Aramaic. The word communism, there's lots of similar words like koinonia. Look at that word. Look up the word koinonia and ask if it doesn't sound like communism. Koi, K-O-I-N-O-N-I-A, koinonia. It's translated fellowship, but it really means communism. Just a little Bible study tip for you. Look up the word koinonia and see if I'm not right, that it actually really means communism. Okay, I'm going to end this video because I want to cut it off at 30 minutes, and I'm going to post it and hopefully get another video up later this evening. So, radical love. And Jesus was a communist, and so should you.